Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we're discussing best practices for sourcing, interviewing and onboarding while the world is working remotely, featuring experts and technology leaders from hiring related startups, culture specialists and in-house recruiters. If this is your first time at CTO Craft, let me tell you a little bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. The community numbers are over 1,000 and provide one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, an online community, and events like this one. So I'm emceeing today this Byte session, and I'm the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. So our first panelist today, let's introduce you to Anna Dick, the CTO at Hiring Hub. Hi, Anna. Could you give us a short description about yourself, please?
Yeah, hello. So yeah, Anna Dick. I'm currently CTO at Hiring Hub. So we're more of a scale-up now, I guess, business in Manchester, and we're building a marketplace platform, very much data-driven, that connects employers to recruiters, basically, and kind of using marketplace technology and a lot of data to understand the quality and performance of recruiters, and doing that quite easily through a marketplace platform.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm great for you to be here. Secondly, I introduce you to Pedro, the co-founder at Landing.Jobs. Pedro, good to see you here. Could you give us a short introduction about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for the invite, and really happy to be here. So about myself, I'm based in Lisbon at the moment. I'm the founder at Landing.Jobs. We are a tech recruitment marketplace. We help talent find the right roles for their next steps in their careers. And I'm also the founder at FutureWorks. It's a recent venture we started, which is more related with career development and learning, especially remote learning. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. And our third panelist today is Kristian Bright, who's the partner at the People Collective. Welcome, Kristian. Could you please give us a short intro?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So yeah, I work at the People Collective. We're a people talent and culture consultancy. So we partner with scaling businesses to define and deliver their people strategy. So that includes things like defining their values, behaviors, their hiring process, to coaching and developing their existing team.
Great to have you here. So we'll save time at the end for the audience to ask your own questions. So please add your own questions at any time in the ask a question link just below the video. So let's talk about hiring remotely successfully. The last few months have been disruptive for businesses, with many implementing a hiring freeze in Q1 of the year. Though I've been impressed with how much hiring has continued remotely over these last few months. As lockdowns are being reduced and businesses are being cautious with their back to work policies, remote hiring is likely to still remain in place for a good part of this year, and may continue on if this continues to be successful. So with the first question, I'll go to you, Kristian. Because so many candidates are currently actively looking for remote work opportunities already, what are the top techniques to use when sourcing these candidates?
Yeah, I don't think anything massively drastically changes when it comes to your approach to sourcing. I think, in terms of finding people, in terms of identifying prospects as such, I still think you would use your typical outreach channels and typical methods to find them. I think my approach would be, when there's a flood of people into the market, is actually to it's around your messaging and your engagement that really becomes, important. So, if you are sort of identifying people and who are open to remote opportunities, it's just being very clear in terms of your setup, where you are, what your environment is like how things are changing, really sort of focusing in on being clear around what you are offering essentially, and building that engagement with potential people that you want to discuss opportunities with. And I think it's just being really clear and transparent. It's about preferred skills, preferred experience, interview process, including salary ranges, including any details around the transition that you've had, and that can come from your actual proactive messaging to candidates, but also your job adverts, and then you're still going to seek things like referrals as well, because that's always a great channel from your existing team. But I don't think anything massively dramatically changes in terms of how you do it. I think you still are you utilizing channels like LinkedIn? You're still using Boolean searches. You're still, targeting in terms of like your advertisements, and still working on referrals as well. Obviously, in terms of like sourcing candidates, can't go to like actual physical like events or anything at the moment, but that, that doesn't necessarily stop you from identifying people.
Okay, great. And how can you actually help candidates self-decide if they're actually a fit in a remote startup?
I think just being really upfront and transparent in your comms. I think it's quite an unsettling time for a lot of people. They, particularly if they're forced into the job market or they're trying to figure out whether a remote setup is right for them. So, I think you can be very upfront and in terms of like how you work, how you make decisions in like a remote environment, how you communicate with each other. Like, do you use things like Slack? Do you use like Workplace? Do you use email? Like, what are the ways that you communicate, what you found good about it and what you found difficult about it, because a lot of companies have had remote working forced upon them. So, that's a journey in itself. So giving people that transparency so they know what to expect. And if they don't feel like that setup is going to work for them, then allowing them to kind of, self-select themselves out of processes or not even like, getting into a process at the beginning. But I think it's just that transparency and that like, real clear messaging, like that can actually help people to decide whether they want to proceed.
Yeah, and I'd really agree with all those points. I really think that getting some human touch points as early on in the process can really help. So we've worked with a lot of clients who haven't necessarily been up for doing like a quick 2-minute phone interview with someone, but actually we've really recommended that because that it's not the face-to-face element, but actually speaking to somebody can really help you find out quite quickly. And that's both sides as well, whether it's the kind of, not just the role for you, but is working at home like the right thing for you, but also the overall company culture. And that's something that is much harder to instill. And I think a quick focus really early on in the process, whereas you might have actually done competency tests or tech tests, and you might have had them, done CV reviews and stuff with multiple people. Whereas actually just getting on the phone and talking about the company and the role can really help people self-select quite quickly and early on in the process.
Yeah, and what do you as a company, like, how are you helping people to get set up? Like, particularly around like, the actual like, hardware that you have, like the tools that you use. As Anna said, sometimes like having that human interaction early, like shorter calls, like explaining some of this stuff to people early on actually does save you a heck of a lot of time, instead of going through an entire process.
Excellent. Okay. And remote work removes a lot of barriers for some people trying to access new roles. So like traveling to work or access to the office, flexible hours around child or other caring responsibilities. How do we think this will impact the available talent pools? Anna, first. Yeah,
so I really think it's obviously going to open up the talent pool that you've got. And I think a lot of companies are already seeing that they're getting a lot more people who are applying for remote roles. And that's geographical location obviously changes as well. So you can take people that you wouldn't necessarily have had access to because of their location. That could be other countries, but I think also it could be just around the corner. It could be somebody who's had potential access problems in terms of a disability or other impairment that stops them actually getting into an office. So we've worked with a client who's now they were already fully remote. They provide like call center services, I think, remotely. And 30% of their workforce are already either registered disabled or living caring for somebody, whether that's elderly or, and that's amazing because I think that means that, even with my locality, you could potentially open up for certain roles and skill sets, you could really open up the talent pool. And I think that's a different area. And then also from a diversity point of view, you get more different elements of different people working in your teams as well, which I think adds to it. And it means that for them, the flexibility of working around home can work around the hours as well, in terms of that they need to do things.
Sure.
Yes, I think, it will open up the pool in ways that we haven't necessarily instantly thought, because I instantly thought geographical location was the first thing. But
yeah, in general, I think it's going to make the talent pools a lot more flexible. So we were very restricted to the main tech hubs. And, speaking like about Lisbon, London, Porto, there's a lot of people living there because they have to. The opportunity is there. And there's a lot of people especially like tech leads and stuff, they definitely want to move back to the countryside or where they were raised. So that, actually, it's only about the talent pool for hiring and recruiting, but also people's happiness, they're going to be more happy, hopefully more productive at work as well. So I think this is great. The only barrier we had pre-COVID was companies kind of insisting on I must have a tech hub in Lisbon, in London, and I think we're going to go into a distributed model. Obviously, remote first companies, they were already there. This is not even a situation for them. But yeah, this is definitely good for talent, and I think it's great for companies as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I heard somebody was saying that there'll be a resurgence on seaside towns if people want to move to the coast in England, or move down southwards.
Yeah, I'd heard that as well, a mass exodus from cities, and I don't see it. I still think people are going to want, office environment. They want that human interaction. But I agree with both of your points. Just giving people and companies options. Before, where they didn't think it was possible to kind of have people join remotely, or they felt like it was it was too much to too difficult to overcome. Now, companies actually have experience of testing it out. So I can only see it's a good thing to give people, options. I think who it's bad for are those probably companies or employers who like, a high degree of micromanagement, because, there's obviously a high degree of, there's a high degree of trust when it comes to remote working, because you're not physically in the same location.
Yeah, employers who value presentism are fucked, basically. And also, by the way, a different perspective. So I was born in Lisbon, so I'm a city person. For me, this is great because this city was starting to be overwhelmed with people. And, this exodus is actually great. So I can relive my city again with less people in it.
Sure. Actually, on this exact same topic, we've already got a few questions getting asked from the audience, and this one's very relevant to the current one. Do you limit the remote hires by location during the hiring process? E.g., friends at USA companies are largely limited to advertising remote only to specific states and countries. So, this could require legal issues with your local employment or contract law. Pedro, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so some companies will. So, for instance, we have a few US clients. They don't want to hire people from specific national. It doesn't have to be a country where you are. It can be even your nationality, Iranian people, these kind of things. So that's going to stay there as well. So there's all of these restrictions. What I see a lot happening is time zone limitations. So a lot of our clients have minus GMT -1 to +2, something like that, and you cover a lot. So I say 3 time zones is you have access to a lot of talent then, and it's way better than just a city or something. I'm not sure if I answered, but I believe that's going to continue. It's not going to change. Now we're going to have more companies doing it.
Excellent. Okay, then. Anna, does the increase in candidates make the process of hiring more difficult or easier, would you say?
Well, I think it depends on your volumes, doesn't it? But I think generally, from our experience so far, it's making it a little bit harder because there's a lot more people that are potentially looking for roles. There's a lot less roles around. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of people are, maybe panic submitting for roles that maybe just aren't, maybe they haven't done the due diligence around the company or the specific roles. And it's really what's that process of sifting? We've got one company who'd still been hiring almost 50 people a day worldwide. So the amount of CVs that they're having to sift was massive. And that's kind of why they came to us, because the importance of a recruiter in that process was much heightened for them. And that's whether that's an internal recruiter expert or you're using external agencies, but kind of pushing out to the agencies to help them, to have them help you with that process, to kind of filter down so that they can then present you back with more of a shortlist. And that does involve them understanding your culture and your role and all of those great things. And that's where, if you have good recruiters that you build relationships with, I think that can help that problem. But we are seeing that people are getting bombarded with CVs and candidates.
So what I see in the marketplace right now is like what we used to call, and we still call, passive talent. It's even more passive right now. So people are sticking to their guns. If you want to poach someone from a company, the premium price to do that increases. It's logical, right? And on the other side, like with all the layoffs going on, like we have a lot more active talent. Now, this creates a problem. If we look at the recruitment marketing funnel, all the way from awareness to the hire, usually the pre-COVID, for the companies that weren't full remote, the whole pressure would be on the awareness, to the beginning of the funnel. So you needed to get people interested in your company, like this was the thing. Like there was a lot of investment in employer branding, all this stuff. Many of the people who did it didn't know what they were doing, but still, getting people in, and then obviously the process had to be done right. Sometimes it wasn't, but still had to be done right. What happens now is that a lot of companies, we're getting a lot of candidates just, applying. I don't know what he said. Panic applying. That's a good way to put it. And that puts the pressure on the hiring process itself, not the awareness part. So, for instance, remote first companies, pre-COVID and now as well, they had a lot of candidates applying always. So they didn't have to work their asses off to get a lot of people in the funnel. They just needed to have a really slick recruitment process. Obviously, reputation is a thing still, and they had to work on that. So what we're assisting, in my opinion, is that we're now paying more attention to the last parts, or the last stages of the funnel, because talent is also more remote aware, and they want to work more remotely too.
Sure. And I've seen a lot of recruiters become redundant recently as well due to this crisis. Yeah. So therefore that filter option is less available with less recruiters available on the market. So, okay then, Kristian. So with this, at this point in time, are you looking for different types of skills given the current environment? Things like managing, working within a remote team before, would you say?
I think probably from like, I guess, a functional or like a technical skill perspective, probably not looking for, drastically different things. I think it's on the behavioral side that maybe you will, if you're an employer who's hiring, like you will maybe look to tweak that slightly and look at that to a closer degree. So obviously, when you're working in a remote environment, it does help if you've done it before, because you can get into the rhythm of remote working before, but that shouldn't put anybody off from hiring somebody who hasn't done it before. I just think it's put a higher degree of thought around like the comms and how somebody collaborates. Written and verbal communication needs to be really clear. I also think you look probably closely at like analyzing. If you're a company interviewing somebody, analyzing, around self-awareness, self-regulation, some of those real sort of key emotional intelligence kind of skills, I guess, because it's, when you're not physically in an office with somebody, I think, it's, there's a real conscious effort not to be isolated. And I think you do need those, you probably would look at those skills in slightly more, to a slightly greater degree, just because they become more relevant as you need to be more deliberate about how you communicate and work with each other.
Sure.
But I think a lot does depend on what, you you can look at different skills kind of all you like, but a lot depends on what the candidate's walking into if they join a company. Are they set up to be successful in a remote environment based on what the company has in place for remote working? If the setup is suboptimal, then it's going to be difficult for anybody that you hire. But it's very much ties into that two-way street of like when you're hiring, like it's as much for the candidate as it is for the company.
Yeah, I guess the CTO Craft community was already kind of like aware of like the importance of soft skills. We're talking about tech leads, C-level in tech. What I really think is going to change, that old mentors like the tech guys, the nerd. Like my background is computer science, so I got this a lot of times when I was at uni, and we also need to evolve on that, like at the individual contributor level. So what we call, you mentioned a lot of these things, the 4 C's, so collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and communication. Like we definitely need to work on this, and we need to be a lot more aware, like at the IC level. I'm not saying that there's a lot of bad leads as well, tech leads too. But we all need to be aware of this. So definitely these skills gain a lot more strength given the current situation.
Okay, and Pedro then, so what is the best testing process for remote recruiting, would you say?
All right. So we actually, when we were in the green room, which is the pre-event, we're talking about this. Honestly, like I've hired our new head of technology, full remote. So I actually met him by chance physically. Last week, he came to Lisbon for a co-creative session at our office, and basically we did it remotely. So the most important thing, and we're discussing this, is to actually, now that we're all remote and we don't have that presentism, so mindset, let's put it like this, we really need to focus on having great recruitment process. So one part of it is the testing part. So I'm a big fan of take-home challenges, whether it's more of a tech leadership role or IC role. But you can definitely do like everything you did at the office, like pair programming, all these things. You can do it online, and I don't see any reasons for not doing it. So I guess in all of our companies, we've done it at some point. So all those things that you were doing on site, really think about it. If you really needed those, honestly, you didn't.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are having to come to that understanding now that they can still actually do this effectively. Yeah. So Anna, what role can psychometric testing play in helping us understand if someone is actually the right fit for your company?
Well, I think we touched on it before, the kind of softer skills and less about maybe the tech skills. But I think that psychometric testing can really play a part in helping you understand, a little bit more about a person, and you can actually do that up front. So then by the time you do get to face-to-face, you can actually then plan, you can plan your interview around some of those things. So you can better understand, how they approach problems, what's their kind of level of creativity, what's their appetite for risk. And I think it's just more data that helps play into the interview process. And I think perhaps it's elements that if you'd have had someone spending an afternoon in office, which is what we tended to do for our, product teams, is that somebody would come in and they'd been a workshop, they'd have lunch, all these kind of things that help you understand and see more details about how a person might interact, or if they're suitable for the company or the role. You just don't get. So I think psychometric testing can really help play into that, and you can get some really quite good ones that are kind of like game related as well, so they're quite fun and interesting to do. And we'd give them, that would be data that we'd feed back to the candidate whether they got the job or not, so that that candidate is then learning something about themselves and whether they're suitable for remote roles, whether they're suitable for that kind of company. So I think it's another dynamic that helps play into, and it's kind of data driven as well.
Where can you find those psychometric testing examples? Do you know some off the top of your head? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we partner with a company, Arctic Shores. They're actually a local company based in Manchester, but there's quite a few other ones, and we did a kind of an ebook about it where we collected a list. If we want to share that afterwards, that might be helpful for some people.
Excellent. Okay then, Pedro, what are the things that we need to pay attention to during the interview when hiring remote employees?
Just a quick one, like, by the way, we use one called Brick, B-R-Y. It's quite cool. But yeah, going into your good question, it sounds a bit repetitive on my side, but again, we started doing everything remote before COVID when it comes to recruitment. So the things that I would pay attention is like body language, planning, like I'll prepare the talent side is like, did they study as, like what kind of questions they ask. So I didn't change much from my behavior on site to remote, and we were doing it for some time already. So that's my stance on this. Like obviously now I need to be a bit more careful on the communication side of things, because we're going to have less opportunities for non-digital communication, so at the office. So I need to be more careful with the communication and assess the 4 C's that I mentioned before. But that's it, just focus more on those.
Okay, and Kristian, how do you try to identify if a candidate is actually a good fit for the company culturally?
I think you need, first of all, and this really echoes, what kind of Pedro and Anna said, like consistently through, it's having that structured and consistent way of hiring, like actually really having a process that is, thoughtful and thinking about particular focus areas within that process. And, the more behavioral values-driven side can be an element of your hiring process. But I think first of all, as a company, you really need to figure out what company culture means for you, and what values and behaviors do you really hold dear as a company, and why are they important to you, first of all. And what I don't mean by that is, hiring people because of a certain educational background or because they've worked for a certain FANG company in the past. It's really around looking at setting up your hiring process to understand, like, do they align with your mission and what you're trying to do as a company? Can you work together to kind of solve challenges? And do you have do you have a mutual understanding of how decisions are made? And those are the type of features that building into your hiring process can help you to really understand, like, how somebody thinks, how they approach situations, and because that's really what you want to see, right? On the more behavioral culture side, you want to see, how they have dealt with certain work situations in the past, and like, would that set them up to be successful in your environment? But I think it's about being really deliberate around, like, having focus areas within your hiring process that are looking at all aspects of a person's skill set, whether it's more technically focused, but definitely on the behavioral side.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, working with people who actually, it's been an opportunity for them to actually revisit their values and behaviors and, their missions and all that stuff that they might have written it down like 5 years ago. But actually, these are the kind of things that you need to live and breathe. And actually, this whole situation has kind of put a new dynamic onto those things as well. So I think it's really good to kind of revisited it and then played it into their recruitment process as well.
Sure.
Definitely, they've suddenly become not posters up on the wall in your office anymore. They're actually like, okay, how do we build them into all aspects of like our like employee life cycle, right from like the hiring point at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree.
And Anna, so video calls could be difficult at the best of times. How can you make sure you get the best out of a candidate during a face-to-face video interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some basic things here, but, I always find like video calls seems to take a lot more out of me sometimes than, just kind of meetings in the office. Not that I can really remember what those are like anymore. But I think it's really important that a candidate has a really good briefing and potentially, a kind of buddy through the process. So someone that can give them a really good briefing, someone that they can test their sound and video with, like we had the green room thing, like they can test their sound and video, like, do they look, are they looking okay? Is the light okay? Can we hear you fine? That's really important. And then I think from the interviewer's point of view is to be probably more prepared. I mean, I think it's definitely made me be more prepared, in terms of making sure that you're asking the right questions, and you've got kind of more of a structure to it as well, which you might not have followed before. I mean, we've done a little bit of work with customers around tone of voice as well. There can be quite different ways that you might ask questions face to face as you would over video, just because sometimes it doesn't translate as well, or the body language doesn't translate. No expert in it, by the way, but I think there are companies that do help people work around that kind of tone of voice, and just making sure the environment's right for an interview. Like I was saying before, like make sure you're not near a window where the postman's going to knock on, or try and keep children out of the way as much as possible, without locking them in a room. One of our, also maybe an icebreaker as well to relax. If people haven't been used to, you might have been used to like the pub quiz with your mates online, but actually that's quite different from maybe the nerves that you might suddenly get when you're doing an interview online. So yeah, maybe doing a bit of an icebreaker as well can be quite nice. Making it, setting the environment and the tone that you want. Can you be quite relaxed, or is it still quite formal? But letting them know up front and managing their expectations, I think, really helps.
Sure. So just on the children aspect, obviously I talk to people every day online, and there's always children involved at some point in my day. In a interview process, would it be appropriate to say, look, I've got children in the house, we may be disturbed? Would that be considered acceptable etiquette for an interview?
I mean, I think it depends. Like for me, because I have children, I was saying to you before, like my daughter is in the back room watching something on YouTube. Hopefully she's engaged enough not to come in. I mean, obviously, I think if it was an interview, I would try very hard to get some other situation. Kids can go out for a walk and things like that, or maybe someone else. But if I absolutely couldn't, and in the early days of lockdown, that might have been a lot harder to arrange something else. So I think to have talked about that early on with your recruitment partner and to say, look, this is the situation, is that okay? I think it's all about just transparency and having that open communication back and forth about your situation. And that will also help you understand if that's a company you want to work for. If they come back and say, like, yeah, that we totally understand, let's try and arrange another time, that's fine. Or absolutely no, the interview has to happen now, and we're not changing it because of your childcare requirements, then I'd probably go, well, I don't think I'd want to work with them. That's not the flexibility I need in the kind of workplace, remote working that I'm expecting either.
Sure. Okay, as we're touching on that then, Kristian, what steps can companies take like this to ensure a positive candidate experience for remote interviews?
With candidate experience, I think Anna's covered a lot of this in the previous question, but I think it is about being upfront and with them around what the process is, and giving them information ahead of time, like if you're doing a video call, like what are the login details? If you're using Zoom and there's a password on it, like make sure they have that far enough in advance. So even what is the focus of the interview, and it's not giving them like the answers as such, but what it's actually doing is allowing them to focus on their preparation ahead of an interview. And there's tools you can use for this. I was looking at a tool the other day called Candidate.guide, and I can share it afterwards, but it's just a really smart way of kind of personalizing your interview experience for every candidate, and just giving them like the upfront information around what the process looks like, what stage they're at within that hiring process, and all the information that they need. I think when it comes to the interview itself, I mean, interviews are by nature, an artificial setting, and then you throw in the dynamic of video as well, and it's very easy for it to be, awkward. So I think as an interviewer, it's like making sure that you are really prepared up front. You have, done your research, what questions you want to ask. You break the ice. You just don't dive straight into those questions. you actually practice active listening as well, because when you're remote, you know, you're not in the same room as somebody, there's the temptation for distraction is actually potentially higher. Yeah, and just being and just allowing plenty of time for them to ask questions and for them to know sort of, okay, what happens beyond this. But it all ties into a consistent theme of, you know, having a structured and consistent interview process, like thinking about it up front and not just, you know, not just going into a process where you've rushed into it and then you have to add additional stages later on. Like I think that's probably happened to all of us at some point, where you've gone through a process like, oh, can you just come and meet this one extra person? Trying to avoid situations like that, because you know, it's I think there's more space for thinking from a candidate when they haven't gone into the office for, like, you know, maybe a few hours, gone into the office to meet people for a few hours and got a real sense of the environment. You know, there's more questions from them. So you being organized and you being sort of clear as a company or as an employer, like, actually goes a long way to, like, just doing the basics that give a good candidate experience.
Sure. Okay, great. And for the next question, I see Pedro's already answering John online, but it relates to the next question as well. So John's question was, take-home tech tests, are they good or bad? What is appropriate to actually ask a candidate in terms of time commitment? And essentially the next question also follows along with paid remote trials or projects. You know, what should you be using them? Pedro, your views on this?
Yeah, so about paid trials, the kings in this is Automatic. So the creators of WordPress, so they've been doing it for a long time. So I was actually just checking if they still do it, and they still do. So they pay you as a contractor for 4 to 6 weeks work, which is crazy, right? If you think about it. But if it works for them, then great. But they built WordPress, so I guess they can have this in their recruitment process. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to, let's say, the normal companies, the ones who didn't build a tool that 1/3 of the internet uses. The usual thing I do at our company is the take-home test. And then I was saying to John, it's my favorite one. It's a 2-3 hours challenge. And honestly, that's only a way for a follow. That's only the output of that challenge is going to serve as an input for the follow-up conversation. That's the most interesting part. That's where I really understand how this person thinks. If they think like from a diversity standpoint, actually, if they think differently from our team, then actually that could be a really good thing if that's what we're looking for. So that follow-up conversation is where I'm aiming for. Obviously, if the challenge reply is horrible, then it stops there. So it's still a stage in the hiring process, and yeah, so that's what I usually do. We're not huge fans of pair programming, but I'm not a hater of that as well. So.
Sure.
Yeah, we use we've always done a similar thing. So we'll do a take-home test and say maximum couple of hours spent on it, and it is just like Pedro said. It just. I mean, like you said, there is a kind of an entry level kind of on it, but it basically is, we're looking more about how they've approached the problem, maybe how they've structured their code, have they thought about tests? It's all those kind of things that is a kind of starting point, especially where, my main team at the minute is mainly Ruby on Rails team, but we're starting to abstract that and look at like different technologies. So for us, it might be, how they've approached something, how they've kind of looked at the problem, quality side of thing, rather than the actual the language skills themselves. If they've got the aptitude to learn, they can collaborate, then, that might be somebody that we're looking for a specific role. But we complement that with also, although we haven't done it remotely yet, but we used to complement that with obviously this half day coming into the office and not necessarily pair program, but they'd work with somebody or a small group on a problem. And so you'd understand like how they communicate as well. And then maybe more in depth in terms of some of their technology.
I think one of the questions about time wise, which is super legit to ask, it relates with what Kristian was saying before, which is you should really come out in an honest manner to tell what your process is like. So if you explain to them, look, we do a take-home test, 2 hours, 3 hours of your time max, as an input for a follow-up conversation, it's totally legit. I mean, they're investing time in the recruitment process, same way the company is. So actually, there was a nice essay. I'll try to find it about, from a developer perspective, what they thought about this. And you know what? You need to test people. I'm not going to blindly hire someone, even if it comes through a referral. If someone comes through a referral, and then I'm going to test them out as well. Also, to be fair with other people we already hired before. So, but this is like a massive discussion in the tech world. Like, we can be like here 3 hours discussing this, and the conclusion would not be, we will not reach the same conclusion, all of us. So, not sure.
Sure.
I think the main thing about, like, take-home tasks is, I think there's a fair bit of debate around whether you would pay somebody to do that task, whether you would compensate them, because I think, I agree, like, a couple of hours doesn't seem like an unreasonable commitment, but also at the same time, does somebody actually spend just 2 hours on a task that they really want to get right? They really want to nail the interview. So I know I'm not the one asking the questions, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what are your general thoughts around, doing like potentially doing that at some point in the future?
I think it's a trade-off, to be honest.
Yeah.
This is my thing. Like, we're not going to change the well, sorry, I shouldn't start the phrase like this. At the moment, this is the way we do it internally. I totally understand, like, for instance, right now, if people are panic applying, let's say they have like 50 recruitment process at the same time, which is ludicrous, with or without a tech test. But if they have to do all of those, assuming they reach that point in the interviews, I mean, they accepted that, like, so it's trade-off. I totally get the talent side of things, totally do. But yeah, again, this is a massive discussion. So as you can see on the chat.
Yeah, I think so. When we've asked people to do a bit of a challenge, it's often like a little bit. It's relatively deep into the process, so it's not. We don't use it as we've just seen your CV. Spend time doing this test. So I think by the time we're asking, we're relatively invested, and I think hopefully that the candidate is quite invested as well. And we have had situations where we've had someone who's maybe got family commitments and hasn't had the time to do it. And we've actually delved in a little bit to their personal projects instead. So it's all about, learning about how somebody approaches a problem.
You can be a bit flexible there as well. Like, I'm not closed down to the possibility of doing pair programming. Maybe it's a bit fairer on the perspective that you spend the exact same time on both sides. So it could be interesting to test it out. So I'm not shut down on this discussion. But again, you're discussing around this topic. So
okay, cool. And then moving on to onboarding then. Anna, how do you ensure that new starters get the depth of onboarding experience they would have got being on site? How do you communicate a company culture so they can live and breathe in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the second bit about culture is quite tricky, isn't it? Because like, you can't just tell somebody a culture, or like my experience, you kind of have to live and breathe it. But I think from an onboarding bit, similar to where we've talked about the recruitment process, it's a lot about planning, and actually documenting, like, what is the onboarding process? Who do we want them to meet? Who do we want to interact? What's the important information? What's the time frames that might happen over? Because it's remote, does it take a little bit longer to get to know people, to understand people, to have confidence to, run a tech breakdown session remotely with a stakeholder? Might be a little bit more daunting if you're like doing that week one remotely, as it would have been if you just kind of like, I just do it in the office kind of thing. So I do think documenting that whole process, obviously doing things where you're potentially buddying up people so they do have someone that helps them through that process who's not necessarily related to their exact team, so they can ask them all those kind of silly questions that you might not want everybody to know about. I think to have early contact with them as well. So like as soon as they're offered the job, make sure that, your manager's kind of, or the buddy is getting kind of involved, so that they don't, hopefully removes any kind of anxiety of your kind of day one starting on a video call. Also, there's some cool like tech things out there. What was one of them? I think Slack could do like a random coffee.
I've heard of that as well, where they do. Yeah, you have a chance to just have a conversation together, a bit like a water cooler chat.
Yeah, and I think that can kind of help with getting people to know people around the company, which then might help them understand a little bit more about the culture if you're meeting the people. Sometimes we've done a few things recently where people have maybe just observed on a video call. So rather than saying, right, you have to like partake, straight away, you can actually kind of observe if it's more of a kind of workshop situation from maybe a new product manager or someone like that, just so they can see how people interact without having the pressure of them thinking they have to like, say something really clever day one, or the pressure of other people, thinking that they need that they're partaking. That's quite good as well.
Yeah. I think one thing I would add as well is, when you're like onboarding is full on at the best of times. It's it's information overload and it's really difficult to absorb that information. I think it's really important to put in just make sure there is downtime in someone's like schedule to actually just give them a chance to kind of like digest all the things that they've kind of learned. And Zoom fatigue is like a real thing as well. So if you're on like video call after video call after video call, like having a bit of time to just kind of for a new starter to kind of gather themselves and just think through like what they've learned that day is really, really beneficial to them, within that, and just gives them that break. So if they then go on to like, the next part of their onboarding, it's actually, they've had a bit of a mental reset before they then go into that next part.
And Kristian, so how do you actually nurture the relationship of feedback and trust with new starters from day one?
I think for managers, if you have somebody join your team, like, you want them to be successful, right? You want to have like structured onboarding so they can get up to speed as quickly as possible. If you're doing this first time remotely, I think it's being open and honest around the fact that you are new to remote onboarding and like you are probably going to get things wrong along the way. But encouraging them to actually, share their feedback and give, really give you their opinion on like, well, I found this useful, or I didn't find that useful. And as like a leader with the team, checking in with them and regularly to just, kind of build up that relationship of like, we can have open and honest communication with each other and actively encouraging that feedback from you as a leader, because somebody new joining, potentially not, it's not always easy to want to share feedback, particularly if it's, constructive feedback with like your new boss. So as a leader, you can take a lot of steps there to actually, actively encourage that feedback. And I think getting off on the right, doing that at the beginning sets you off on the, on the right foot. And also I think just about holding each other accountable, both the relationship between the new starter and their manager, but also, how you interact with other people in the business. If there are things that are, unclear, or the things that are not okay, like it's about everybody holding each other to account. And I think, when people see that, there's that trust will build up.
Okay, great. So for the last 10 minutes then, we've got lots of questions getting asked. The first one is one that went through my head as well. I've had an argument with my girlfriend about this first question, actually. So it'd be great to hear your guys' view on this. How do you handle salary ranges for remote, given the different ranges of locations? Obviously, Facebook announced that they were going to do this eventually with their full-time remote policy. Let's start off with Pedro first.
Okay, so there's different approaches to this. So you have the DHH base camp approach, which is you pay San Francisco salaries regardless of the location. Again, not all companies can do this, especially startups. Can be especially difficult for them to, unless they have a really, really good pre-seed raise. So I would cut down their option. I don't think it's very legit for most companies, but it's out there, so you can opt in for that. And then you have the one of my favorites is the buffers, transparent salary calculator. I'll share in a bit on the chat, where they take your location into account. What happens is, like, we as professionals, we have a value, right? And our value is different from our salary, because our salary definitely depends on how in demand our skills are and where we are. Now, the where we are part is getting a bit less important with the new distributed environment we're starting to live in, but still plays a role. Obviously, if you build a distributed team in Portugal, let's say, or in Belarus, something like that, the cost of living, and especially if they're not in the big cities, is going to be way lower compared to, let's say, London, right? So you definitely need to take that into account. I think the best manner to do that, like, again, my favorite is buffers way. Doesn't mean you need to open up to the public about it, but internally, you should have something like that. And this is related with the economy. So again, a lot of people would say, yeah, but I'm worth the same as an engineer working in Germany. Why should they get more than I'm when I'm in Portugal, something like that? You are in a location that pays less, and specifically also costs less to live in. So that definitely plays a role.
Okay. Anna, Kristian, any comments, disagreements?
No, I mean, I agree. I definitely have favoured the buffering idea. It's the kind of cost of living, amendment to a salary. I think that kind of makes sense, just for the same reasons that Pedro said, really.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the similar tracks. I mean, a lot of me does want to be like the base camp approach is what everybody should do, because I don't know, in some ways it seems like, I don't know, it seems like the right thing to do, but actually I think, the practicalities of, if somebody is remote, then they're in some ways having the benefit of working from a location that actually, they want to work from, and the cost of living does factor into it, and then there's it all depends on like the cost for business as well, and like what they can afford to spend. They may save on an office, but then there may be other costs associated with having distributed teams. So I favor that internal transparency and just really having like a comp like philosophy as a business of like what you are willing to pay people, rather than having drastically different salaries.
Yeah, and I think if you make it transparent and fair, like anything, that's important.
Great. Okay, the next question then. How do you stand out from the crowd in remote hiring? Because you're no longer competing just locally, you're competing globally. We'll start off with Kristian for that one.
I think you stand out from like, what you're actually willing to offer. I think, are you going to offer, if you're a startup, are you going to compete with some of the, Silicon Valley tech companies on comp? No, you're not. But there are other things that you can offer that can help you to stand out from the crowd. And like, in remote hiring, there's a lot more, there's freedom for people and there's more flexibility, but there's also more ambiguity for them around like what their work setup is and how logistically how it all works. So I think if you're very clear and very open around like your setup and how you work as a company, how you make decisions, your documentation, like, you look at companies who've been doing this consistently, like your GitLab, your Basecamp, like their documentation is superb, and like it's they open it up so everybody can see it. And I think those are the type of things that can help you stand out from the crowd of like, you have put thought into how you operate as a company in a remote environment, and you are projecting that message into the market rather than just going out and like, okay, we're hiring, yet you can be remote. I think it's it's a deliberate thought process around like how you actually work as a company and how then you market that to the talent market.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. complement it by, I feel it's a lot about purpose, as in your company's purpose. I've been working for a small startup for a while. We haven't been able to afford a fancy office and a pool table and a lot of the other things that help attract or differentiate sometimes. And it's a lot about, purpose. It's a lot about the ability to have autonomy in the tech that we use. Those kind of things can really, make a difference, because you do lose, everybody's working at home. And I think there was some metric we'd heard from one of our customers that their attrition was so much lower, and they paid market rate salary, but they didn't pay like massively above. They didn't have a fancy office. Everybody was already working from home, and it was actually that the purpose combined with having a job that suited you and suited your lifestyle and suited whether you had kids or whether you had to care for somebody was actually way more important when it came down to it than a lot of the kind of extra little benefits that sometimes companies can use. I
think it gives you an opportunity to look at your benefits as a company as well, and what additional things you are offering to them. And I completely agree around giving people the flexibility to live and work and live their life in a way that is outside of this 9 to 5 you must be in the office type approach. It offers so much more from a balance perspective, but from a pure actual benefits, I think it gives you an opportunity to, as an employer, potentially look at those and tailor it to a more remote audience rather than ones in the office where, if you have a perk like a beer fridge, it's not going to be for everybody, and you're not going to put that in everyone's house. So maybe you think about something else.
The end of the ping pong tables part. The end, just business end. That's good.
But benefits, I think people are already starting to relook at some of it for remote working, like offering subscriptions to Headspace or some kind of well-being app, or maybe online exercise classes or something. I think people are already starting to realise that there are other benefits that support people's new needs because they're working from home.
Okay, great. And just as the last question then, essentially, with the opportunity for greater diversity with remote hiring, be it just inside the UK or wherever, how do you manage the team fit when members of the team could come from multiple different cultures or mindsets now? Anna?
I think probably the same way that you would have done, I guess. I mean, I've always been a promoter to getting as diverse team members on my team as I can do, whether that's different backgrounds or different cultures. But I guess it does open it up more. But I think it's more about, can they do the job? Are they the right fit? Do they like the company? Do they fit with the purpose? Do they want to work there? So I don't see that too much would change in that kind of evaluation. We've always kind of evaluated people in terms of, do they want to work with us? Do we want to work with them? And can they do the job, kind of thing? And yeah.
Okay, great. And Pedro, considering you're quite European and global, what would you have anything to add for this?
Yeah, we're still in the EU, so that's extra points there. The thing is, when pre-COVID, we were less distributed, so you would have that physical, natural empathic connection with people, regardless of their backgrounds or their ways of thinking. All of this. Going into a more remote model, you really need to work on the empathic communication, especially written communication. So, for instance, for me, I'm one of those people that I write something and then enter and then something else. So I'm not a person that writes messages 3 sentences, stuff like that. So I really had to work on those for myself to really like read it 2-3 times before really put myself in the other person's shoes before pressing the enter key. And I think this type of async written communications really does play a larger role now that we are not privileged to have that as much as human interaction as we did before on the offline world.
Yeah, I think actually as a manager, like then, if you are going a bit more worldwide and cultures that you're not aware of or countries that you don't know much about, I think it's important to educate yourself around knowing a little bit more about someone's culture or someone's the area in which they live in, but I think I'd want to do that anyway. But I think you probably learn more interesting and diverse things with it.
Yeah. And it works both ways. So ICs, they also have to do the same thing. So I think this is a legit skill that people need to work on, which is something we never really thought about it, or not many people were thinking about this stuff. Maybe in like mega hubs like London, where it's like a melting pot of cultures, it came out more naturally, and there were more people thinking about this. In Lisbon, is not as diverse as London. We wouldn't think about it as much. Now we really do have to think about such things.
Yeah, and I think being aware that you are probably going to get things wrong at the beginning, but that point about holding each other accountable, and if there are poor behaviors that are like affecting team fit, is actually addressing those kind of at source, and working through some of those challenges, and actually being deliberate around the communication piece and setting clear expectations of this is what is acceptable and this is what is not.
Excellent. So I think we're pretty much come to the end of the time today. So thank you, Anna, Pedro, and Kristian, for taking the time and talk with us today. It's been brilliant. You can connect with our speakers after the event on the links I'm just sharing now in the chat. So their blogs, LinkedIn, websites, all available there. Our next CTO Craft Bytes session will be on dealing with burnout with Andy Skipper, who mainly runs the CTO Craft community. And the link to this event is also in the chat as well, guys. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and the weekend. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.